morning. Welcome to Northshore. I want to say hi to everybody who's listening and here in this room, and those of you who are joining us online. Happy Memorial Day. We're so glad that you're here with us this weekend. I want to start with a quick word about something that's coming in 2 weeks, a new series that I love, and one of my favorite series we do here at Northshore called Summer at the Movies. And in that series, we don't just kind of sing songs and hear a message. We'll actually watch through different scenes from recent films and talk about how these stories connect, point to, illustrate, give insight into God's story, because they can in some real life-changing ways. It will be a great opportunity for you to bring a friend to church. You could just say, hey, our church is talking about movies at church, and it's going to be fun. There'll be movie candy and iced coffee, and I've asked the facilities team to put 1,000 reclining chairs in this room. So it'll be real comfy. Just so you know, because of copyright laws, I can't tell you which movies we've picked, and this series will not be online, so you'll have to come out and see it starting June 9th. And I want to just exhort you to be thinking about a friend you could bring to be part of the series. It could be a life-changing time for them. So, we've been in this series called, or about how to make great decisions, called What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do. And one of the reasons, if you think about your life and how you make decisions or how you go about trying to discern what the right things to do are or what the right decision is, one of the things that can make making a choice difficult today is what happened yesterday. One of the difficulties in discernment is what we bring to our present decision from the past. I imagine everybody listening right now has something in their past that they'd like to redo or undo or have undone. Years ago, right after I finished seminary, I was serving as a young adults pastor, and I was asked to preach in the main services at the church, which was a real exciting thing. I'd only preached a few times, and because it was a multi-campus church, I wasn't speaking just to the kind of 1,000 people live in a room, but to thousands more via video. And so I really wanted to give a message that would be unforgettable, and it was, but not for the reason I'd hoped. In the middle of my talk, I made one of the worst kind of verbal slip-ups I've done in all my years of ministry. I actually got a copy of the video from my last church because it's not online. What I said shouldn't be online. So question, would you like to see it? A little embarrassing for me, but just listen closely as I try to repeat a phrase or a point I was trying to make. Take a look at this. A second observation is this. To pass the torch, you can't just share your faith, you have to share your life. To pass the torch well, you can't just share your faith, you have to share your wife. That sounded a bit weird. I might as well sit down now because that pretty much canceled the rest of the time together. Are you with me, 950? Are you with me, San Mateo? Okay, here we go. Now, I was thinking this morning, it wasn't online, but it is now. So, oops on my part. I wish I could redo that moment. I wish I could redo the fashion choices I made that morning. I wish I could redo a lot of things. In fact, I didn't hear the end of that for a long time from my colleagues. In fact, the very next weekend, our senior pastor showed the clip again to the whole church again and then joked about how the elders had to come together to talk about Scott's new philosophy of relationships. And we all have these moments we wish we could redo or undo or have undone. Maybe for you, it's a bad decision from the past that you made that you regret. Maybe for you, it's a missed opportunity that you still dwell on in your life. Maybe for you, it's how a relationship ended, if it ended poorly. Maybe for you, it's an addiction or a habit or a struggle or a secret that you can't share. Maybe for you, what's in the past is a decision that somebody else made, something that happened to you that you didn't even choose, and now you feel like you're living with the grief or the hurt. Sometimes, you see, because of what's in the past, it can be hard to feel joy in the present. It can be hard to hear God in the present. It can be hard to make decisions in the present. The past can be a powerful thing. A professor and writer named Jerry Sitzer talks about how the past can wield control over us in two ways. He talks about the first as regret. Regret is that piercing sense of disappointment you feel based on a decision you wish you could undo or redo. Regret is often expressed when people use those two words, if only. If only I had picked a different school, if only I had a different job, if only I had treated that person a little better, if only I had saved that money, if only I had asked that person out, if only I had not asked that person out, if only, if only, if only. And the Bible, if you don't know, is filled with stories of regret. One of the most poignant examples comes in the life of a man named David when he was king over Israel at the time that Israel was at its kind of height of its power. And then David made a decision he regretted. He seduced a woman, a married woman, and committed adultery with her. He got her pregnant. And then he made sure her husband was killed in battle to try to cover it up. And even though David eventually confessed what he had done, his political leadership was never as strong. His life as a father was filled with failures. In fact, it was as if he could never escape that one regret. Eventually, one of his sons named Absalom turned against him and was killed. And David cried out these words, my son, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. If only, if only, if only. That's regret. Question, how many of you have ever said to yourself, if only? If only I had done that, or if only I had not done that. And I know that too. I carry my own list of regrets. If only I had handled some of my dating relationships differently. If only I had not said those harsh words to Nina in anger. If only I had not lost my temper with Nora. If only, if only, if only. We're all in this room this morning. You came, or you're listening right now, and you have some list of regrets from the past. Another way the past can wield power over us is in the form of bitterness. If regret is based on what we've done, bitterness grows out of what's been done to us. And it's based on this acute sense that you've been wronged or let down, and you grow bitter. I recently read the story about a diehard Cleveland Browns fan named Scott Ensminger. And for those of you who don't follow professional football, if the Browns have some of the most committed fans in the country for a franchise that's one of the worst sports teams in history. The Browns are one of 4 teams who have never made the Super Bowl. They have had only 2 winning seasons in the last 20 years. And this particular fan named Scott was a lifelong season ticket holder. Every year, he would actually write a song for the team and send it to them, along with his own advice about how to try to win games. And you can imagine the letdown, the frustration, the bitterness watching his team lose year after year after year. In fact, when he passed away a few years ago, his family made a public request in his obituary that 6 Brown players serve as his pallbearers so they could let him down one last time. I'm not making that up. That was in the newspaper. Don't get mad at me. I did not write that. I did not make that up. You can go look it up for yourself. Some of you feel guilty for laughing at that this morning. You regret that a little bit. Ever been around someone who's just grown bitter in their life? And you can sense that kind of spiteful, calloused, defensive, and a me versus the world spirit. And it can almost always be traced back to something that happened, a loss, a violation of justice, an act of betrayal or abuse. And a lot of the time, here's the thing about bitterness. A lot of the time, bitter people have the truth on their side. They've been legitimately wronged or mistreated. They've suffered unfairly. But here's the thing. Bitterness, no matter how justified, doesn't heal the pain. It doesn't change the other person. And over time, it can spread kind of like a poison throughout your life and infect all aspects of your life. And not just you, it actually is quite a contagious thing. Bitterness, like joy, is contagious. It can get passed down from one spouse to another, from parents to their children. It can spread to other people in your life more and more. In fact, that's why the writer of Hebrews warns about this. He writes, "Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." See, it's not just about you. It's not just about your life. It's not just about the pain that you carry. It gets around and gets into other people's lives. But here's the thing. Bitterness can't change the past no matter how right you are. And regret can't change the past no matter how sorry you are. The bad news for this morning is simply this: you can't change the past. The good news is God, our God, the God who came in the person of Jesus Christ, can redeem your past. And by the way, redeeming doesn't mean erasing and starting over. It's not like just forgetting it and moving on. It takes all the elements of your life today, the results of what's in your past, and uses them to tell a new story, to start a new chapter, to move your life in a new direction. The question is, how? How does God redeem the past? How does he do this? Well, there's a well-known Christian psychologist, some of you know his writing, named Henry Cloud, who writes about 3 ingredients that God always uses to redeem the past. He says it takes grace plus truth plus time. If you're here this morning and you're carrying bitterness or regret, stuff from the past, wounds that you carry, baggage you've been hanging on to for a long time, and you're wondering, God, what are you going to do about it? It's going to take grace plus truth plus time. And so for the rest of my time with you, I want to walk through each of these ingredients in order, because the order is crucial, so that we can experience God's transforming, redeeming power in our lives about our past. Starting with grace. Now, grace, that word can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. Maybe for you, it means forgiveness. Maybe for you, it means kind of like a get out of jail free card. Maybe for you, the word grace just is the word for a prayer before you say a prayer before a meal. But grace, you see, goes much, much deeper. Grace is God's unconditional love and unwavering faithfulness regardless of your past. Let me show you what I mean. One time, Jesus was traveling from Judea up to Galilee, and he went through this area called Samaria. And along the way, he stops at this town, and he's going to have a drink of water at a well, and his disciples go into town to buy food, which is when Jesus had this unthinkable, scandalous encounter. The story goes like this. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" The Samaritan woman said, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Even she is shocked by this conversation. Even she does not understand how he could be speaking to her. And then John explains, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans. 3 times in these few statements, John reminds us it's a Samaritan woman, it's a Samaritan woman, it's a Samaritan woman. Why? Because Jesus had no business speaking with, talking to, having a conversation with a Samaritan woman. And that day, if you don't know, first century Jews did not associate with Samaritans. They did not talk to Samaritans. They did not relate to or hang out with Samaritans. In fact, they would not even travel through this area. First century Jews would go around far to the east, up around to Galilee. They would not even go through this area to avoid having any actual contact with a Samaritan. But it's not just any Samaritan. This is a Samaritan woman. Now, in that time, men did not speak in public to women. This may sound kind of odd or strange to our modern ears, but this was a deeply held religious conviction in that day. In fact, listen to this text. This is from what's called the Mishnah, one of the rabbinic texts from the first century. It says this, "He that talks much with womanhood brings evil upon himself and neglects the study of the law, and at last will inherit Gehenna," which is the Greek word for hell. So this was thought of as a serious offense in that day. And by the way, this dynamic of not speaking to a woman in public still exists in parts of the Middle East today. In fact, there's a New Testament scholar named Kenneth Bailey who spent most of his 40 years of teaching in Egypt or Lebanon or Israel or Palestine. And he said that in all of his 40 years of living in the Middle East, he never saw this social boundary crossed even once. Not even once. But this is not just a Samaritan. It's not just a Samaritan woman. Earlier in the story, John tells us that she came to draw water outside the city alone at noon. Question, why would she be outside the city when there would have certainly been wells to draw water from inside the city walls? Question, why would she be alone when women in that day would always draw water in groups for social reasons and for safety? Question, why would she be there at noon when other women would go to draw water either in the evening or the morning to avoid the heat? Answer, because she was no longer welcome at the wells in the city. She was no longer welcome to socialize or hang out or be with other women in groups. She was an outcast. And of course, later in the story, we find out why. It's because she's had five marriages and was now living with a man who wasn't her husband. So why am I telling you this? because there is no one in all of Jesus' ministry, no one that he encountered in all of his life who had a more scandalous past than this woman. Which is why what Jesus said to her is so shocking. He doesn't rebuke her. He doesn't dismiss her. He doesn't insult her. He doesn't condemn her. He doesn't condescend to her. Jesus offers a gift. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. If you knew the gift of God. I think about that moment when you carry the sting or stain of your past and that acute, shameful, I wish I didn't even exist anymore way, and your life gets real small, the shame gets real big, the regret goes way up. Think about that moment, encountering the God of the universe, and him saying, hey, if you only could see, if you only understood, if you only knew the gift of God, the grace of God, which, by the way, you don't go out and earn, you don't have to deserve, it's just my gift to you. And by the way, regardless of your past, I would give it to you. Imagine what this woman must have been feeling as she heard this. After years of going to that well alone, years of bitterness and regret and shame, and here this man, Jesus, just seems to accept her, speak to her, embrace her just as she is. Didn't ask for an apology, didn't ask her to go promise to measure up from this point forward. God's grace is God's unconditional love and unwavering faithfulness regardless of your past. When Nina and I moved here, we were working with a realtor to find a place to live, and we had been renting in California. We didn't know if we'd be renting or buying a home here, and so we were looking at lots of different options, newer homes, older homes, fixer-uppers, upper fixers, all sorts of stuff. And some of the homes we visited came with this little condition, kind of in writing, a legal condition called as is. You guys know that phrase, as is? As is means there's no warranties, no money-back guarantees. As is means there could be some issues you find once you move in. As is means the problems with the house that may stem from the past, that may not even be your fault, they're going to be your problems now. God's grace is saying, I take the human race as is. God's grace is saying, it's not just saying, I love you, it's saying, I love you as is. That's grace. And here's the thing about grace. Here's the thing. You just have to receive it. Grace, you see, must be received. It's not your past that gets in the way of God's grace. No matter how bad, how shameful, whatever it may be, it's not your past that gets in the way. It's your pride. It's your self-righteousness. It's that part of you that would refuse to receive it, that thinks, I've got to measure up. I've got to put on a front. I've got to earn my way or work my way in. And a lot of people, for that reason, begin to think things like, the more I've messed up, the less God loves me. And maybe you've thought that. Maybe you're thinking that right now. But grace shows just the opposite is true. Listen to what Paul once said. He said, where sin increased, grace increased all the more. Think about that. This means the more messed up you feel, the more God's love is poured out on you. You just have to receive it. And here's the thing. You could do that right now. You can receive it right now. My encouragement would be, stop thinking about it so hard. You just need to say, God, I accept that you've accepted me. God, I accept that you accept me. That's grace. God's unconditional love and unwavering faithfulness regardless of your past. To redeem the past, we need God's grace plus truth. When Jesus offered that Samaritan woman living water, she responded quite enthusiastically, Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. And Jesus told her, go call your husband and come back. And she's a little nervous now. And she says, I have no husband. In other words, let's not get into the gory details about my past. Let's go back to this living water thing. That sounds much more pleasant to talk about. And Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." And if you don't think Jesus has a sense of humor, here it is, folks. The Samaritan woman was doing everything she could to avoid what? The truth. Ever done that in your life? Maybe spin the truth, a partial truth, a little bit of the truth. Even when we pray to God in private, sometimes I'll find myself kind of spinning things or saying things to kind of avoid the facts. But Jesus doesn't let you get away with it. I love that phrase. The fact is. We're coming back to the facts, because here's the thing. The facts of the past are actually your friends. Think about it. Imagine going to a financial advisor and he says, "Your financial future looks great. Your investments are safe. Your savings are strong. You'll be able to retire in style." And so you go out and celebrate and buy a fancy dinner, only to find out that your credit cards are maxed, your mortgage is default, your savings are depleted. And so you go back and say, "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" And your financial advisor says, "Well, I knew you were broke, but I didn't want you to be offended. I wanted you to have good feelings when you walked out of my office. I wanted you to feel good about yourself." You'd be pretty upset, wouldn't you? And you'd be looking for a new financial advisor. You see, when it comes to your finances or your physical health or the stuff that really matters to you, you want the truth regardless of how hard it is to hear. But when it comes to your past, the choices you made, the secrets you hold, the baggage you carry, most of us prefer good feelings over actual facts. But dealing with Jesus, redeeming the past, means dealing with facts, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's embarrassing, even if it changes what other people think about you. A mentor of mine used to say, "The truth will set you free, but it will make you feel miserable first." Because it means saying things like, "I have an addiction," or "I struggle with lust," or "I've been lying to my spouse," or "I've been talking badly about you behind your back." Sometimes telling the truth means saying things like, "I'm angry, I'm hurting, I'm mad at God," which can be scary to do. Sometimes people feel like they can't say that kind of stuff, especially in church circles. So let me just declare this now. If you're mad at God, frustrated at God, feel let down by God, it's safe to say it here. And if you're messed up, if you feel like you've been hiding a secret, a habit, a sin, it's safe to talk about it here. And you need to say it. You need to admit it. You see, for God to redeem the past, grace must be received and truth must be admitted. Grace must be received and truth must be admitted, because here's the deal. God won't redeem what you won't acknowledge. That's why the past keeps sneaking back into your present, because God won't redeem what you simply won't acknowledge. One of the staff values here at Northshore for our staff team is that we say the last 10%. We say the last 10%, because when it comes to truth telling, most of us only want to go to about 70% or 80% or maybe 90% there, but then we don't want to go all the way there. It feels like it could get messy or feelings could get hurt. But now in our meetings, people will say, or someone will say something like, "Okay, here goes, last 10%. And you know in that moment, it could get real. Feelings could get hurt. You not feel good about what's being shared. But the alternative is the truth does not get named and the past stays in the present. And it stays in the present because it keeps getting whispered about behind closed doors and through gossip and behind somebody's back. You need to say the last 10%. You need to hear the last 10%. And I know, there are better and worse ways to say the last 10%, right? Some of you may know the names Charlie and Martha Shedd. They were Christian writers who talked and taught a lot about marriage. And one time, Charlie talks about a contentious fight with Martha, and he said he found a note on the fridge that said, "Dear Charlie, I hate you, love Martha." Maybe there are better ways to share the last 10%, right? Paul says, speak the truth in love, in love. And by the way, if you think God is calling you to tell the truth to someone that you don't really love, that you don't want to will their good, that you aren't willing to get to know or spend time with, you need to look at your heart first before you worry about their behavior. Speak the truth in love. Grace plus truth, and then plus one more thing, time. Grace plus truth plus time. You've probably all heard the phrase, time heals all wounds, right? It's actually not true. God heals all wounds, and God's healing takes time. Jesus once told a parable about a farmer who grew a fig tree for 3 years, and the tree bore no fruit. And so the owner went to the caretaker of the vineyard and said, "Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil?" And the caretaker replied, "Leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it, and if it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down." Here's the thing. Your life is the vineyard, and you are its owner. And as the owner of your life, it's easy to get frustrated and impatient with the problems that won't go away, the temptations that won't let up. As a pastor, one of the statements I hear all the time from people is, "I can't believe I'm still dealing with this." And maybe you've said that. Maybe you think that about what's going on in your life right now. "I can't believe I'm still dealing with this." But here's the thing. Jesus, who is the caretaker of your life, the caretaker of your soul, is asking for more time. Think about that. Jesus is more patient with your life than you are. Let's keep digging around, he says. Let me water and fertilize and care for it. Let's see what happens over this next year, because redeeming the past takes time. And by the way, it's not just downtime, it's hard work. A few years ago, I injured my left shoulder, and the doctor said there's a surgical procedure that can fix this. And I thought, that's great, let's do it. And then he said, but you'll have to go through months of rehab. And I said, months like Earth time months? I mean, months? You mean to say this isn't going to get fixed overnight? And I'm going to have to do exercises that are painful and inconvenient? And his answer was yes, if you want to get well. See, if you want to get well, it means digging into the uncomfortable stories of the past. It means reliving deeply painful experiences of the past. It means confronting bad decisions from the past. And this doesn't happen by accident. You have to be intentional. You do. You see, if grace is something we receive and truth is something we must admit, time is something we must take advantage of. So let me ask you this question. How are you using your time? Are you just assuming the past is the past and it's way back there, and if I bury it deep enough, if I ignore it long enough, it's just going to go away and it won't bother my life anymore? Or are you intentionally spending time with Jesus talking about your past? Are you spending time in Scripture letting it speak over your past? Are you spending time in community letting trusted people speak love and challenge and encouragement to you about your past? Are you getting help from a mentor or a counselor who can coach you and give you guidance about your past? And if not, we would love to help you take that next step. You need to take that step. I encourage you to make a note on your Connect card, go by the welcome table on your way out, have a conversation, get in a small group, but you need to be intentional with how you spend your time when it comes to the past. Because redeeming the past takes grace plus truth plus time. There's a woman in our church named Kathy Torrey. She's been at Northshore for over 20 years. And I got to hear her story recently, and I wanted you to hear it as well, because it speaks into how God works in and through to redeem our past. So let's watch her story.
Part of my story did start when I was born. And I had a mom and a dad, and my brother was 8, my sister was 5. And when I was about 6 months old, we did have a tragic event that put our family into chaos. My sister got sick with encephalitis. She was in the hospital for 3 months, almost died, suffered brain damage. When she came home from the hospital, all attention was focused on her and teaching her to crawl again. One of the things that happened is I was 9-10 months old at the time, so I was learning how to walk and crawl at the same time. And she began to focus her anger and direct her anger and frustration at not being able to crawl onto me. I always had to watch my back and never was quite sure if I was going to be a playmate or if she was going to turn on me and do bad things. Everybody tiptoed around. The goal was never to upset Karen. Never wanted to have those temper tantrums. And she got birthday presents on my birthday, and people would say, well, does that bother Kathy? And my dad would say, oh no, Kathy's a good girl. She understands. And didn't think much of it because that was what was normal in our family. And as the months and the years went by, the anger and the resentment that was deep down inside of me began to ooze out and began to lose my temper. And then a couple of years later, I got married, and 2 years into my marriage, I began to suffer high anxiety and depression. Then about 7 years passed, and then my husband lost all our money, our house and our home in Chicago, and the only job was out here in Seattle. So we moved out here in crisis and chaos, and he had an affair, and so then I called the recovery ministry at our church. When I first did the first counseling, I thought you did one and done, never again. And then I went through it again, and I'm like, why am I in another support group? I think recovery is a lifelong journey, and I think I learned more about who I am, and it helped me learn more about who God is and what His plans are for me, and it helps me invest in others too. It's an amazing thing to have someone believe in you. And for me, you know, I do credit Loopy with rescuing me and my 4 kids out of an abusive marriage. And it was really empowering when she said that I was going to get stronger, that I would have boundaries, that I would have skills, that I could change, that my life could be transformed. When you're in a support group or a recovery group, you can be truthful there. It's confidential, and it was a place I could say, hey, I'm angry with God right now. And that was okay to say. And my God's a big God, and He can handle my anger. And I have people that know me and know my story, and I'm still accepted, and I am still lovable, just the way I am.
I think what Kathy is trying to share to me and to you this morning is if you only knew that in Jesus' eyes, you are not your past. You are not your past, and your past does not have to determine your future. So my question for you this morning, simply for you to consider before you go on to whatever's next this weekend, is what step are you going to take when it comes to your past? Maybe today is a day to receive grace, to recognize, realize, live in sheer awe that Jesus has come into this place to accept you, to love you, to embrace you as is. And maybe today is just your day to receive that, maybe for the first time. And if so, we'd love to talk to you about that after the service. Come and find one of our leaders and have a conversation. Maybe today is a day to start confronting the facts, admitting the facts. The last 10% that you're keeping hidden, or you've got buried way, way deep, hoping nobody ever has to know. Maybe today it's to take a step of bringing that out into the open. Because of God's grace, it's safe to bring it out in the open. And maybe today is a day to have a conversation with that trusted friend, or to get into a small group, or to spend time with a pastor or mentor or counselor. And we'd love to help you with that. We can help you take a step towards that. Maybe today is to commit right now to saying, Jesus, I'm going to start spending time, not just ignoring my past, but taking a hard, deep look at it. And some of you are long overdue, and you know it right now. You know it. You're long overdue from dealing with that pain, that sin, that hurt, that grief that keeps rearing its ugly head, and you need to take some time. And by the way, Jesus is the caretaker of your soul, going, please, please, let's spend some more time. Let's dig around. There can be healing for this, because you are not your past. You are not your past. If you know Jesus, you're not a failure, you're not shameful, you're not dirty, you're not damaged goods. You are a child of God. You have been made a new creation. You are a beloved son, a beloved daughter of the Most High King. The past has passed. And today can be a new day with Him. So let's take a moment and pray and talk to Jesus about our life and our past right now, if you would. Let's pray. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we carry into this place all sorts of things from the past. failures and mistakes, regrets, bitterness, old wounds, old pains, old fears. And we spend so much energy and effort just trying to bury it down, bury it away, thinking to ourselves, please make this go away. God, please make this stop. And today we confront the fact, the hard truth that we can't change the past. We can't undo or redo or have undone. And Jesus, we name that in grief. It hurts. But we also claim and declare on this day that we are not our past. That because you came and because you died, because you went into places like Samaria and met people that had those unforgettable stains in the past and had grace, Jesus, we know, we confess that you have that for us. Jesus, right now you have that for me. And so it's in your grace that we stand. It's in your truth that we find comfort and clarity and redemption and hope. And it's over the days and weeks ahead, Jesus, we commit to stay with you, to walk with you, trusting not in our faithfulness to you, but in your faithfulness to us, to be with us regardless of the past, as you turn it into a story of redemption and hope. And may that be true for every person listening right now, Jesus. We trust you even with the past. We pray this in your name, and everybody said, amen.